Guru Nation, we have a very special guest for this one. It's not very often, we had Caliph on. I'm trying to get Marty or Vinay or one of these guys to come on. I don't know. It's not they do their own podcast. You seen that one, Wayne?
Yeah.
They actually had a pretty decent podcast, but I haven't followed for a while. But at least initially they had a good one. But we're very fortunate to have arguably the most connected living person at the intersection of the FDA and the media. And this is Wayne Pines, former FDA Associate Commissioner. He's Senior Director at APCO Worldwide. We're going to get into what that is. He's the host of his own podcast called FDA Watch Podcast. Since you're watching this on YouTube, I will have the link to his YouTube channel underneath this video and in the show notes if you are listening. And we're here to discuss his career. He spent a decade at the FDA. He rose to Associate Commissioner for Public Affairs, which is the agency's chief spokesman. Then spent 30 years as the industry's most sought after crisis communications and regulatory affairs counselor. And right now, the FDA is in its most turbulent period since perhaps the 1970s. He's running the FDA Watch podcast, which is actually a perfect person to host that kind of a podcast. And it's a relatively newer pod, Wayne.
Well, it's been going on for a year and a month now, and
Ah,
we've
okay.
been, uh, you know, delighted that so many people are tuning in. I would love for everybody who's listening to this show to
Subscribe.
subscribe. Make sure that you put on the screen someplace, how to do that, fdawatch.net, because we're just as interested as you are in having more subscribers and more listeners. But I've been very satisfied with the reaction to the podcast. It's the only national independent podcast on FDA, and
I
we try to
love it.
broadcast every week.
I love it. And before we get into the career arc, perhaps we just start with why you created that podcast. There must have been a impetus or like a passion for there's something you had to, it's not just you wake up one day and say, let me do this podcast.
Well, we were at the beginning of 2025, and as you may recall, we had an election in 2024, and we had a new administration coming in, and we had a lot of activity that we were anticipating, a lot of statements made by President Trump. During his first term in office, this president, President Trump, learned an awful lot about the FDA. He was involved with COVID. He was involved with, as you recall, he held a press conference every day on COVID, and because of that, he really got to know the FDA better than I think any president that in my tenure has known the FDA. So we knew that coming in to his second term in January 25 that there would be a lot of activity, and we weren't wrong. There's been a tremendous amount of activity at the FDA, and I know we're going to talk about that as this show goes on, but
Yeah.
that's why we decided to start it. And what we try to do on the podcast is not to be, I'll use the word critical, but to be analytical,
Hmm.
because there's no point in being critical. A lot of turmoil, a lot of change. Our job is to document it, not to focus on what people are saying in terms of their criticism. We allow guests to do that, but that's not the purpose.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a new subscriber, so I encourage Guru Nation, click the link underneath this video, or if you're listening, click the link in the show notes. You're going to get to Wayne's FDA Watch podcast. So we're going to follow the career arc, get to the FDA in that arc, but journalism, that's your background. So maybe that makes sense for podcasting. It's in your DNA.
I started
Journalism.
out as a journalist. I started out as a journalist. My first job was as a reporter for a newspaper in Middletown, New York. I uh, became city editor of that newspaper. I always tell people I was running a city room with reporters who were literally three times my age. And that was very exciting. Then I worked at Reuters in London for a short period of time. Uh, then I decided to move to Washington, and my first job in Washington was with the Pink Sheet, which of course covers the pharmaceutical industry. I got that job just serendipitously. It just happened to be a job that was open. I would if the next day I'd been walking the halls of the National Press Building, I might have had a career in a whole different area. I didn't have any particular knowledge or interest in the FDA. But once I got into it as a reporter for the Pink Sheet, I found it to be very exciting. I've always been interested in healthcare. FDA is a central point in terms of assuring the health of the American public. So even though it's a very, very tiny agency by federal standards, it's an extremely, extremely important agency in terms of the health of every American.
Health is one of those things. It's so underrated. I mean, to quote a comedian I just watched, Cat Williams, he said, I don't care if you're a billionaire. If you don't have your health, you're broke. You're poor. And that's everybody. Everybody, and that's a really important regulatory uh framework that we have, and it's been put in place for a reason, and it's not perfect. And I think it's one of the most criticized ones because people are not so educated about these topics, and it's very easy to get caught up in, well, this is what I read over here, and then these people say the completely opposite thing. So someone like you to have to navigate all that, but it makes sense because you started out with journalism. So that's part of that requires researching. It requires you to do your homework. It requires you to have facts, which is something people tend to skip these days with social media.
Well, what it makes you do is to translate. I like to use the word translate. You have to translate, in the case of FDA, relatively complex science, complex law into terms that the public can understand.
Hmm.
And when I was at FDA as chief spokesman, I think that's to be, somewhat immodest about it, that's what I was known for, that I could put into terms that the public could understand what was going on at the agency and to, translate risk into human terms. And that's what I've always tried to do.
And so the Pink Sheet reporter for the Pink Sheet, you got interested in healthcare. You got interested in life sciences. It must have been a steep learning curve for you having no experience in it prior to that, right? What was
A-
that like?
Absolutely. Well, my first year at the Pink Sheet, I knew nothing. I was literally walking the halls of FDA at the time. Now you've got to go through a lot of hoops to get into the FDA building, and you have for a long time. At the time, you could literally walk the halls and stop in and see anybody who was willing to see you, and that's largely the way that I gathered the news. The Pink Sheet continues to this day, and it covers the pharmaceutical industry. After 3 years at the Pink Sheet, I was offered a job by FDA. Uh, the FDA at the time, this goes back to the 1970s, a long time ago,
Hmm.
did not have a consumer education program, believe it or not. Even though it was a consumer agency, it didn't have a consumer education program and had no materials directed at the consumer. And I was hired to create that program. And that was my first venture into working for the government. It was a very difficult decision for me to decide to leave journalism, and I'm not going to say go to the other side, but work for the government. Not be a journalist. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it was a very challenging decision to do. I don't regret for a minute having done it, but journalists like their independence. They don't want to work for somebody who's going to tell them what to do. When you're working in the government, you got a million bosses,
Yeah.
and it's a whole different environment. But I enjoyed every minute at FDA, and I have never met anybody who would say that working at FDA is not the most productive, interesting thing that they ever did in their careers. It's an extraordinarily interesting place to work. It's very important. Some people don't like the decisions that are sometimes being made. They get overruled sometimes. You read about that kind of dissidence, but you will never have anybody say that that it's not important work and it's not very, very interesting work. I
Yeah,
encourage people
yeah,
to, who are in this field to, even if it's just a year or two, spend it at the FDA. A lot of people start out at a year or two and it winds up at 30 years. They spend their whole careers there.
yeah. And that says something about the job satisfaction there. I've heard similar things from the current FDA administration, like, hey, the people that we have here, they're really good people. Everyone's excited to be here, and you can kind of feel that from the people I've talked to as well. So you rose from director of consumer education and information to chief of press relations to then associate commissioner for public affairs.
That's correct. That's
So what
correct.
is that pathway? How does that even work there? Like how are you like what metrics are they looking at to say, hey, you know what, Wayne, now he's going to be associate commissioner for public affairs? Like, how do you rise the ranks, so to speak, in a place like the FDA?
Well, I left the FDA after a few years at that time. I've been in and out of the FDA several times.
Okay,
So I left the FDA to start a newsletter. And then when the job of chief of press relations opened up, I went back and I was offered, a title that I was 31 years old. I was offered the title of Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Public Affairs. To have the title of commissioner in my title at the age of 31 was very, very
that's a hell of
interesting,
a
very
CV.
exciting. So I jumped at it. And this was a time when FDA was first starting to really be covered by the media.
Hmm.
And it was involved initially in a lot of interesting issues. People who, with long memories, will remember the days when FDA tried to ban all diet foods by banning saccharin, which was the only artificial sweetener on the market. We even had a plan to ban hot dogs that contain nitrites in them. These were the kinds of issues that I was dealing with at the agency. So this was front page news, and the agency really had never been on the front pages before. It had nothing to do with me; it had to do with the issues that the agency was dealing with, and it was very, very exciting. I've written about all this. I've written as
Hmm.
I've done 16, written or edited
The
16 books,
books,
and
yeah.
I've written a lot about my experiences as a spokesman for the FDA and how I learned. The a major study on caffeine that got again front page news, or 3 Mile Island, which was a nuclear facility in Pennsylvania near Harrisburg that had a meltdown that finally President Carter, had to go up and straighten out that situation. I was very fortunate to be the lead spokesperson for the media on a lot of these national issues. Very, very exciting time for me personally and for the country. And that's how FDA started to get on the front page. It's been on the front pages ever since.
Ever say,
But
yeah.
that was the first venture for the FDA to really be in the public light.
Interesting. I didn't realize about the diet foods because these days, one of the criticisms is, the food part. Um, critics would say, well, how did he let so many things through? Well, if you go back a couple of decades, there was actually consideration to ban everything. Other critics would say, well, that's not freedom. We we need to not stifle innovation and let people do uh, what the free market says. So there's a balance between public health, public safety, and free market capitalism that I know the FDA is not necessarily involved in business, but it definitely affects industry by
Absolutely,
the decisions
absolutely.
and policies.
Well, the saccharin story is a very interesting one. Again, I've written more about, I think, that episode than any before. At the time, saccharin, which is the red stuff you see, was the only artificial sweetener. So all diet sodas, all diet foods, anytime you want to sweeten your coffee, it was saccharin. There's a famous story about Teddy Roosevelt when he was president. he was asked to ban saccharin, and he is quoted as saying, "By God, I use it every day, and so I'm not going to do it." It's always been controversial, but along came a Canadian study that found that large doses of saccharin cause cancer in rats under the FDA law. The FDA was required to ban it because it could not permit a carcinogen in animal or man to be on in the market. There was a public uproar. I am told that the Congress received more correspondence on that than they did on the Vietnam War and on a lot of other major episodes in American history because everybody wants their diet sodas and everybody wants their diet foods. And at the time, it was the only artificial sweetener on the market. So, and at if I, I'm trying to remember the details. I think there were 7 stories in the New York Times one day on that. You know how people reacted, how the industry reacted, what the science was about.
Hmm.
That's how heavily it was covered by the media. And again, I had the opportunity to be really in the middle of that, and it was very exciting for me. And
Yeah.
I learned an awful lot.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I think Americans assume, okay, the FDA is in place to make sure that whatever the stores sell is, it's supposed to be safe for me, but they make the leap and say good for me. And there's there's a big gap between what's safe versus what's actually good for you. And that's where a
Right.
lot of the criticism comes because people point to it and they use a moving scale and say, well, see, they allow this. That means they don't care about people gaining weight. Well, no. Their first role is actually to keep people safe from carcinogens or things that are going to cause like public health crises. So people like to use this sliding scale. I think the FDA gets way too much unnecessary criticism. It's a no-win situation for the people that work there.
Well, nothing is absolutely safe.
Hmm.
And, people use the word safe. In the pharmaceutical context, of course, the law says safe and effective, but everybody knows that every drug has side effects. So nothing is 100% safe for everybody. And one of the hard things about being the spokesman for FDA and indeed in what I do now is recognizing that the word safe doesn't really mean anything absolute, and different people take away different meanings from the word safe. And it's
Yes.
particularly important I think in the pharmaceutical area because when the FDA approves a drug, it says they use the terms safe and effective, shown by adequate and well-controlled clinical trials. But we know it's not
Hmm.
absolutely
Hmm.
safe, and we have to communicate. One of the challenges of the pharmaceutical industry is to communicate, and of course of the medical profession, is to communicate what safe means for an individual patient. That means something different for every patient.
Relatively speaking.
Right.
Um,
All relative.
yes. So you founded the FDA Consumer Magazine related to this topic.
That's
And what
correct.
what was whose idea was it? Was it a FDA initiative or was it just you and some colleagues that thought it'd be a good idea? How did things like that actually work at the
Well, there was
FDA?
a magazine that FDA published called FDA Papers, and it was oriented toward industry, and it had, you know, industry or by definition, it was industry oriented. And when I was named director of consumer education, I, decided we needed to have a consumer publication, and I received permission from the then commissioner to convert FDA papers into FDA consumer. And that started. I was the editor in chief of FDA Consumer. I named it, so to speak. I mean, my staff and I named it, and we wrote. I wrote an article. We had 10 issues a year, and I wrote at least one article for every single issue without exception. It was the only way to keep up with it because I had a tiny staff and we had to write it. and
Yeah.
I'm a writer, and so I had uh, to write it. So it became an award-winning magazine. I'm proud to say, and it doesn't exist anymore in its old form. Magazine, nothing exists on paper the way it used to. There are consumer articles that are written by FDA, but it's not really published as a publication. But for what, 40 or 50 years, it was one of the leading consumer magazines and had a lot of good information in it. Uh, in some ways, we broke new ground because some of the articles actually set policy, at least when I was there. And in order, all the articles had to be cleared by the experts at the FDA, and
Wow.
sometimes I was able to set, not me personally, but the articles were able to set policy as we had to make certain decisions about what to say about certain products and about certain categories.
Interesting.
So,
So somebody may have had an article and a reviewer would say, "Hey, this is actually rejected," like a complete response letter in a way.
well, let me give you one example, which is everybody can relate to, and that is the FDA historically had always uh, been concerned about and taken action against the use of vitamins. The food people at the FDA, the nutrition people said at the time, people, do not need to take dietary supplements if they get a balanced diet. And that always caused controversy for the agency. It was a difficult position to defend, that we would be opposed to vitamins. So, we did an article, and I remember speaking to the commissioner. I spoke to the general counsel, who at the time told me that he himself took a daily vitamin. And I said, it really doesn't make any sense for FDA to be so vigorously against vitamins. We should encourage people to take appropriate vitamins, not to overdose on vitamins, to understand the value of vitamins. But to take a position that is anti-vitamin doesn't make any sense. And so,
Right.
we use the FDA Consumer Magazine to direct that policy, and that's been the policy of the FDA uh, ever
Hmm.
since. And
Hmm.
that's one example of how we were able to set policy through the communications process.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good example of like why that piece of content would be important. Well, you can kind of explain more of the nuances of a complex topic without worrying about is this official FDA guideline, right? It's just more like an opinion piece, or would you consider them
Well, it
opinion
wasn't an
pieces
opinion
or
piece. Whenever you publish an official government document, it becomes an official
official?
document. So it became
I
policy.
see.
I mean,
They lead to the policy. I see.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes it a especially difficult role to be in because it's meant to be consumer facing, but then anything is actually can be taken as official FDA policy.
Hmm. Right.
Interesting. Did you have fun doing that?
Enormous fun.
I would imagine the conversations there and that how big was your team in that for the FDA
Well,
consumer magazine?
uh, I had two proofreaders because everything had to be
Okay.
proofread, and I think I'm trying to remember, had two art directors and uh, one or two writers.
Interesting.
That was about it. Small staff, small staff.
And then would someone give you the topics or give you like a choice of topics, or was that you guys coming up
That
with?
was that was that was us guys.
That was you guys.
That
Yeah, see,
was-
that would make it tough for me just thinking about it as an outsider. I'm not sure I would enjoy that kind of a role. It takes a certain kind of person. I think you have to be rigorous, you have to have attention to detail. It's definitely not a platform to be exploring ideas.
Well,
Yeah.
the number of products and the number of policies that FDA has is, limitless. FDA
Yeah.
oversees products that account for 20 cents out of every consumer dollar. Foods, not red meat and poultry, which is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture, but all foods other than red meat and poultry, all drugs over the counter, prescription drugs, medical devices, uh,
Wow.
radiation emitting equipment, cosmetics.
So it's endless.
So the number of topics is really endless for a consumer, and consumers need to be educated about the proper use of all of those products. And in the case of policy, they need to understand how FDA regulates uh, those products. So that was the goal that we established. You're taking me back a long time now, long time
I'm
now.
trying to find parallels between that kind of direct to consumer communication versus what this new FDA administration is trying to do with their podcast I mentioned with they're supposed to release complete response letters now, which I have yet to see like them showing they're supposed to be in real time. They're not in real time. They're nothing close to real time. Why? I have no idea. But if you're gonna put out a consumer facing piece of content, in your case, an article, in the FDA's case, a podcast, let's say, in the current FDA's case, and then your own policy kind of conflicts with that, you're left with a confused industry and a confused consumer, which seems like what we're having. And it seems like that was this new administration's intent to fix this problem. And so I don't know if that's ever a like it seemed like you were able to do it and there wasn't this kind of confusion. Everything was aligned. The communication was aligned, right?
Well, FDA has a difficult challenge in that regard. A lot of the information that the FDA has, especially in the drug area, in the pharmaceutical area, is confidential.
Hmm.
It's protected by law. The very existence of a new drug application, unless the company has announced the existence of a new drug application or the existence of an IND, is not public information. Any of the data in an IND or an NDA is protected, and it is a challenge in terms of especially in the pharmaceutical area to have a balance between what the public needs to know and is entitled to know and should know, and what is trade secret and what is confidential information and
Hmm.
what is confidential financial information. One of the reasons that the FDA advisory committee system was set up, and I was involved in that
And
as
setting
well,
up that
in
idea
setting
of
up the system.
AdCom.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and the reason for doing that is because when FDA approves a new drug, there there needs to be some discussion publicly uh, about it, and the advisory committee system
Hmm.
uh, provided an opportunity for companies to present their data to in a public forum for an group of advisors to discuss it. It's a very healthy environment. Now they're cutting back on advisory committees quite substantially, which I don't think is a good idea.
Oh,
But
are they cutting back? I didn't realize that.
oh, for sure, there's no question about that.
Oh, wow.
Uh, the entire advisory committee system at FDA is.
Is it for budget reasons or did they say why?
No, it's a decision that I think is made by the new leadership of
Oh.
the agency. What the current leadership is doing is they're having their uh, special sessions. For example, just to give you an example, when the agency, when Dr. Makari, the current commissioner, was interested in women's health, and he had a group of people that he, and his staff arranged to come in and present information about the role of estrogens in women's health. That was done in a public forum, but it did go through the advisory committee system where they didn't vet every
I
single member
see.
of the committee for conflicts, and it was a different disclosure system, and the FDA really did not present that. It was a different forum.
I
That
see.
led to the agency's decision, which is very recent, to change the labeling for estrogen products, to remove the boxed warning that grew out of the Women's Health Initiative that urged women to restrict their intake of estrogens. And that's largely based, I think, on the experience that Dr. Makari, as a physician at Johns Hopkins, had, and that was the direction that he wanted to go to. And uh, there is controversy within the medical community as to the role of estrogens, and that's legitimate. But in terms of the advisory committee, the way that came about was there was about a dozen uh, quote experts who Dr. Makari relied on. They came in and they spoke for 5 minutes each. It was a public meeting. That's not the way that a traditional advisory committee would have uh, would have worked. It didn't vet all the data the way that should have.
I
The
see.
outcome may be satisfactory to a lot of people, and I'm not talking about the outcome, but the process was much different than historically FDA would have done in previous administrations.
I see. Yeah, we have a lot of retail investors that tune in and watch, and AdCom is something that comes up every now and then. And didn't
The
realize you had a huge role in setting that up.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the investment community heavily attends advisory committee
Yeah.
because that's when we have exposure to the data publicly for the first time.
Hmm.
It's the first time that FDA would have commented publicly on the data. And if a company's application is rejected by a committee that clearly has major financial implications, or if it's approved, but the committee can't approve it, the committee can recommend FDA approval, but
Right.
whatever the committee says always has significant financial implications.
Of
And
course.
so at some of these advisory committees, there were hundreds of people, and before they were telecasting them on the internet, there was an influx of people from Wall Street who were attending the meetings, and I don't, I wasn't tracking. I don't know whether they were trading during the day on the news, but
Wow.
reporters were sitting there and sending out hourly reports as to what was going on some of these important drugs. Now it's a little
Wow.
bit different. Now, an advisory committee would be broadcast. People can sit in their offices and watch it. And when there is an advisory committee, they still do because of the implications and because of the disclosure of the information. And that's
Yeah.
that. I think that
Yeah.
that was an important process in terms of the transparency of
Hmm.
the drug approval process, device approval process, and they even had a food advisory committee, which didn't discuss specific products, but which helped direct the agency in terms of policy.
Now, patient advocacy is very important in all of this. It's something that us as clinical researchers or even investors, we don't realize the maybe influence is not the right word, but they have a certain level of power that they can get their, I guess, outcomes, especially in rare. You see this in rare disease now. Um, do you think those patient advocacy groups prefer the AdCom, or do you think the public forum type of platform is better suited for patient advocates? Because the AdComs invite patient advocacy groups as well.
Yeah, at the advisory committee meetings, is a public session, and any member of the public can make a statement, and when it comes to important new drugs, uh, members of the patient community would always, I'll use the word testify, it's not official testimony, but they would
Hmm.
they would always speak up, and that was extremely important for the members of the committee who are experts to hear from the patient community. In addition to that, during the processing of an NDA or a BLA, new drug application or biologic license application, the patients often speak up. There are special sessions. When companies come in and meet with the FDA, they uh, uh, often bring a patient or a representative of the patient community. That has become an extremely important part of the drug approval process. You have to have the patients on your side. And, you know, the rare disease community is very well organized in many ways. National Organization for Rare Disorders, which I've been involved with for many decades, is, helps set up some of the patient groups that influence the approval process. I remember Janet Woodcock, who used to be the head of the Center for Drugs, she was we used to talk a lot, and I remember her once telling me on a particular drug, she says, "Where are the patients?"
Mm.
She expected the patients to speak up. And I
Yeah,
think that's the mindset of the agency. And certainly, I don't think that has changed any in the past year under this administration. I think they expect to hear the patient voice.
for
Uh,
sure, for
very,
sure,
very, very important, very important.
for
And
sure.
and the clinical community plays an important role because the clinical community identifies the patients who will be most suited to speak to the agency, and the clinicians and the patients need to work together to communicate the need. The major message that they need to deliver is not necessarily the safety and effectiveness of the product. The FDA needs to know the need for the product. You know, why is this um, product needed? Why is this new treatment needed? How does it fit? And on cell and gene therapy, where sometimes you have an N of one,
Yeah,
you need, not that you have that one patient testifying, but you need to hear from individual patients that the FDA needs to not only know about the product being developed, but also about the natural course of the disease, the natural history. NORD has been terrific in helping to bring to FDA the natural history of diseases. And it's not that the FDA doctors don't understand that, but hearing directly from patients is so important. I can't emphasize that enough. Very important element.
yeah. It's something that I, until recently, just kind of never really paid much attention to. But I tuned in December of last year to a FDA town hall. Guess it was a public forum with Duke, and they were talking about expanding access for epinephrine. And
Mhm.
it was an 8 hour Zoom, just like we're on now. Our podcast won't be 8 hours, but it was literally on the whole day. I was working and had it on in the background, and then just one advocate after another, and then another group came in, and then a physician came in just to talk about expanding access, perhaps what it would take to go over the counter with something like epinephrine. They would talk about compliance issues and all that kind of stuff. So, do you think that is the future of communication, or do you think adcoms? I mean, this is the first time I've heard that adcoms are getting cut or replaced. And if so, are they getting replaced with this kind of stuff?
Well, the advocacy by patients continues in different ways.
Mm,
The adcoms have diminished significantly in numbers
mm,
and in importance. Whether that will ever be revived, remains to be seen. But
mm.
under this administration, right now, it appears as if there will be relatively few public advisory committees. It doesn't diminish the importance of the patient voice. I know I've said that repeatedly.
Yeah, yeah.
Can't say it enough because I think, especially for people who are doing clinical trials uh, and who are in the industry, they need to recognize the importance to FDA of hearing from those people,
Right.
from the clinical investigators and from the patients who are in the clinical trials. and from people who need the drug and what the unmet need is.
And I'm glad patients are getting and these groups are getting their voices heard. Hopefully increasingly so, because I think that is the right path to go. And like you said, it's not so much the safety and efficacy that the FDA needs help understanding. It's more the needs. How does this actually impact the patients themselves? It's hard to know that unless you hear from them or you are one,
Mhm.
right? And then all of a sudden your needs change if you become a patient. And we are all patients at some point. So we're talking about us as well.
Right.
Uh, Private sector, and we're going to come back to the FDA because there was some drama, but private sector, the majority of my audience. Um, how did you like private compared to FDA?
Well, it's much different.
Yeah.
I always used to say when I was at the FDA, I didn't have to pick up the phone and call anybody. Everybody was calling me the whole day, so I
Is
never
it
had to
better?
make an
Which do you
outgoing
prefer?
call. When I went into consulting, I had to call people and solicit business. But what the private sector does, I was in the consulting business and I have been since I left the FDA. And the role I tried to play now is to encourage compliance. People who work at the FDA understand the importance of encouraging compliance, and that's one of the things that I try to do in my role now as a consultant. Try to help people understand the FDA. The FDA historically has been defined as a black box, as an agency that's difficult to understand. I think to a certain extent it still is. Again, unless you've worked there, you don't really understand what's going on inside the agency. There's no deliberate effort not to be transparent, but there is certain information that cannot be disclosed, and there's certain processes that have their own configuration. And so, the role of the people who have worked at the agency and then leave is to try to navigate that process, to try to encourage compliance, understanding, and how the agency really works. I think that's very important as we advance medicines. In order to advance medical care, we need the FDA. The FDA approves all new medical products, and we have to have an efficient system of doing so. And I'm hoping that I contribute somewhat toward making that system more efficient.
Oh, for sure. I People have mixed feelings about public private. They call it a revolving door. And the gut reaction is, yeah, I'm against that. They shouldn't. But if you actually look at the industry, the nuances, the complexity, you need people to be able to navigate both of those industries. Like you can't just have, otherwise you just have two silos growing gigantically in different directions,
Yeah.
as opposed to growing together cohesively, which is for the benefit of our society.
Well, if a person works at the FDA and has that expertise and then leaves for whatever reason, uh, what do you expect them to do other than to use their expertise? So that becomes,
Yeah,
the revolving door.
yeah.
Is it a does it look good on the surface? No, to have somebody
Hmm.
go from the FDA to go to industry. Is there any fundamental problem with it? Are people taking advantage of the system? Is it dishonest in any way? Uh, Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think it's good for the development of pharmaceuticals, for example, for people who have been at the FDA to come out and to share not any confidential knowledge, any knowledge of competitors or anything like that, but to share their general expertise in the development of new products. That's the way we make medical advancements. I have always been an advocate for transparency in government. Uh, and I don't think that you can have enough for transparency in terms of communicating information and for sharing across the board. One of the issues is should negative trials be published? I've always been an advocate for negative trials being published because you need to know not just the positive, but the negative. So there's lots of ways to increase transparency. But to me, the revolving door is a false issue.
Yeah.
It's a false issue. I don't think there's any fundamental problem with people coming out of FDA or having worked in industry and going into FDA and working there. Lately there have been a number of people who have had industry experience, and I think that's good. I think that's good.
Yeah, you're right though on the surface, like if you're somebody that just reads headlines, you're gonna have a visceral reaction to it. Like, oh, of course, these drug companies can afford the highest p pay, and then, we'll just have this implicit agreement that you'll come here. But the more you actually look at the inner workings and the transparency that actually needs to happen, I mean, most of the time these are publicly traded companies, so this is not like secret handshake deals going on. Everything is announced with the SEC, with the FDA, of course. Like there's a lot of financial disclosures and all that kind of stuff. I work in research, I know that as well. We have financial disclosures for all of our investigators, sub-investigators, and matter of fact, the PIs, the principal investigators for the studies, they assume 100% of the revenues from a study, even if they only get, let's say, 5%, or even if they only get a salary. They assume on their name through that Sunshine Act all of the revenue. So then when an uneducated individual looks at the transparency, they say, ah, see, Dr. Such and such is on the payroll. Look how much he or she made. And in reality, it's like, no, the
Mhm.
institution they work for got that, but they have to put their name on it because they were the investigator. So I think there's the same similar thing here. I used to think this way too because I was younger and more naive, but the more I work in the space, I'm realizing there's a lot of myths that need to be busted. And I think it will take more people like you
Right.
having podcasts, having a voice to get that out there. And for what it's worth, this current FDA administration, I was a huge fan. The first day they came out, they started doing podcasts. And I was like, wow, I've never seen this before. I'm actually gonna subscribe. And we need to see some follow-up, though. We need to see the actions
Mhm.
matching the words. So it's never a perfect situation I'm seeing, but hopefully it's headed in the right direction. Although that's a podcast for another day. Oh, APCO. Before
Mhm.
we leave the private sector again, we need to talk about APCO because you transitioned to APCO worldwide, President of Regulatory Services and Healthcare. So
Mhm.
can you tell us what APCO actually is? I noticed it on your email signature. I've never heard of it, which I don't know how that's possible.
Well, everybody should have heard of APCO. APCO is a consulting firm, does public affairs, has an enormous scope around uh, the world. An international firm. It used to be APCO Associates. Now it's APCO Worldwide because it
Okay.
does have a worldwide footprint in the communications area, in the public affairs area, in the legislative area, in helping countries and helping develop new programs. A major presence in Europe, major presence in the Middle East, major in Asia and of course in the United States. So I've been honored to be on the staff there for such a long time. We tried to build up a healthcare practice, and APCO now represents a number of companies, not just pharmaceutical companies, but insurance companies and others in that space, and has done major work in advancing the cause of public health in the healthcare area, but also advancing a lot of other interests. Represents, the Clinton Global Initiative, had a major presence at the Davos meeting just now. So
Hmm.
very important firm. No, it doesn't get a whole lot of visibility, but uh, uh, that I mean, that's just a function of the way that the media works these days. Nobody gets visibility these days. The media is too diffuse.
Yes, so we got to give ourselves our own visibility, which is why
Right.
we do these podcasts and we can go more in depth. So when it comes to companies like AppGo, just maybe what's for I think the majority of people watching, I'm sad to say, never heard of it. So like the elevator pitch for what they do and then what kind of other companies are involved. Like are we talking about a dozen other companies or with rare disease, are we adding more of these kind of consulting firms or maybe give us the quick elevator pitch so we understand what
Well,
it
APCO
does.
is a consulting company, that deals with communications, with public affairs, with government programs, with lobbying, with, and on an international basis. It's hard to, on the, financial services. It's
Wow,
hard to categorize all the services that APCO provides. Are there other firms that provide a similar range? Um, uh, there are a lot of companies that provide similar services, but I don't know of any company that provides the full range of AppGo on an international
interesting.
basis.
Okay.
It's been a remarkable journey for me to watch AppGo grow and thrive and have such a great influence around the world. Communications is obviously extremely important. We have gone through, since I've been with APCO, huge transitions, in communications. And right now we're undergoing, still additional transitions with the use of AI, with, all sorts of other things that are coming in. So, um, companies, the private sector and the governments need to be able to manage that well, and that's what APCO helps them do.
Interesting. I'm gonna do a deep dive on AppGo. Guru Nation, you do the same. Okay, Wayne, it gets juicy, man. So you were on the New York Times, the only time you were in the New York Times.
No, not the only time. The only time I had my picture in the
The
Times.
only time, sorry, the only time you had your picture in the New York Times, of
Well,
course,
that was interesting.
was, do you want to explain the situation? So first of all, how you came back to FDA, maybe tell
Yeah.
us when you came back and why.
Well, I have been fortunate to have been asked by a help either train them for their confirmation hearings or to just give them advice. And in 2020, when Steve Hahn became commissioner, I knew him. It's publicly known that I, helped him prepare for his confirmation hearing. He asked me to join him at the agency on a consulting basis. It wasn't. It was, just a consultant to help with COVID because there, was such a dynamic, and that was, extremely interesting to be back in the agency again on a no, I wasn't involved in anything material other than COVID.
Now, when
Um,
was this exactly? Like during the panic of COVID, like early
this was in,
days
yeah,
or?
this was in 2020 when COVID was just starting
Wow, okay.
before the vaccine,
So panic,
and
like the world was
yeah, yeah.
panic on fire. I remember
And,
those days.
and there came a point where there was a press conference at the White House, and some data were announced by the president, by Secretary Azar, by Commissioner Hahn, and there was a miscommunication of some of the data, and the the reaction the next day in the medical community was we need to have the data presented in an accurate way. It was not a deliberate mistake. It was an inadvertent error in terms of the information. So the commissioner issued some tweets, which said which corrected the information, and I did have a hand in that process, and it was not well received within the administration because they felt that it looked like we were, being internally critical. So,
Mm,
my contract was terminated on that basis. And I received 150 emails and correspondence from people I'd never heard of, some from people I've gone to college with many decades ago,
mm.
saying thank you for doing that. I was quoted in the Times as talking about the fact that the government needed to be transparent and needed to make sure that the information in the public domain was accurate. And I felt very comfortable with that positioning for me. So uh, you know, I, wanted to continue in my role of giving advice to the commissioner on COVID, but that was terminated. But I felt that the information that needed to be corrected.
And then, so this was maybe the turning point for the public's trust in the FDA. And when you, so the issue was initially some data was published, and in order to correct that information, Commissioner Hahn tweeted the
Right,
correct information.
right. That's correct. Uh, Public trust, is now, of course, a huge issue, but it's always been a big issue. The
Yeah.
public needs to trust its public health,
Mm,
and any government agency. But it's especially important in the health area because there's so much misinformation out there. You have to know who to trust and who to rely on.
mm.
And again, as I've said repeatedly here, I've always been in favor of transparency, of making sure that the public has accurate information. I think that if there's one uh, point in my career, one thing about my career that I would want to emphasize is that I've always been an advocate for that transparency, and I've been in a position where I've been able to influence it.
Yes. And for those that want to learn more about that particular situation, there's articles on it and uh, the podcast as well, Wayne's podcast, FDA Watch. The first couple episodes you do talk about that as well. What did you learn from that? Do you, well, I guess what are the lessons to be learned? It sounds like you got your contract canceled or terminated because you put the truth out there, which
Well,
shouldn't be the
there were,
consequence for that.
I think that's an accurate assessment, but that's what happened.
Hmm.
Um, uh, it was unfortunate. I felt okay with it because I felt that I did what I had to do. And I advised, I mean, I provided advice. I didn't issue any tweets under my own name. I gave advice, and
Hmm.
Commissioner Hahn felt comfortable with that, and I think it was the right thing to do. It just reinforced, uh, my own commitment to transparency in government and to making sure that the public has accurate information, especially in the healthcare field. And that's been my life in terms of my career.
Yeah. Well, we go from that, from COVID, which was very polarizing and it became political, which is crazy to me. And that ushered in this Doge RFK Jr. Some people
Mhm.
call it a crisis. If nothing else, it's chaotic. I mean, from an observer who on the sidelines wants it to work out and was a fan of the idea of being like radically transparent, I'm seeing it's not actually. I'm just seeing the talking points, but not so much the actions. And I know it's still early, so we'll see. But one of the quotes that you had on from Stat, I believe I got this one. Even though the intent is not to affect product reviews or inspections, inevitably by cutting back on services, there will be an impact. And this is on the 3,500 FDA employee cuts. Now,
Mhm.
what's the truth on this? Because I've heard from McCary on his podcast, hey, none of those were reviewers. They were all like admin workers. I mean, no one who was involuntarily terminated, I think is the words he used, were actually reviewers. Um, what is what do you think is your opinion on the ramifications of what happened?
Well, the FDA lost about 20% of its employees.
Hmm.
In the pharmaceutical review area, it was a smaller percentage. Some very significantly, some people with significant experience, decided to leave or were terminated, and some of that expertise cannot be and has not been replaced.
Hmm.
Right now, in the pharmaceutical review area, NDAs and BLAs, the agency is functioning. The Most of the deadlines, not every single one, but most of them are being met. Meetings are taking place, and there needs to be some consistency and predictability in the agency, and so we need to have a consistent staff. I think that's well recognized. So we have to get used to the agency functioning with fewer people, with AI. I mean, part of this is AI is doing some of the work now, and that would have happened regardless of the administration. And been a commitment by this administration to use AI still more. So, again, in the drug approval field, I think that the while we're still getting used to the different people and to the use of AI, it's functioning. And I think that that's the bottom line that I have. One of the things about the FDA, I can't, no one who's ever worked at the FDA can say enough about the people at the FDA. Uh, they will do what is necessary to protect the public health and to do the right thing. And I think we have seen the people at the FDA step up as even as they've seen some of their colleagues leave, they have stepped up and have done the job that is necessary. That the commitment of the people at the FDA is beyond belief. You never see it anyplace else, anywhere. And that's the tribute I would pay to the agency. So to people who are developing new drugs, who are in the clinical field. We have an agency that is functioning and that will be responsive and that will provide good guidance in terms of clinical development.
Yeah, we do need to see some more consistency and stability there because some of these reviews are leaving everyone scratching their heads. And it gets to the point where if it gets too overboard, you might risk sponsors deciding whether they're going to run some trials or not. And there's a whole lot of headwinds in that space as well. So, I guess last question, because I know you got to go. I don't want to hold you more. We'll have to do a part two at some point. But Marty McCary, the new FDA commissioner, you've seen a
Right,
lot of commissioners come and go.
right.
What's your read on whether he can restore operational stability there? It seems like what would success look like to you in 18 months? I think your opinion is more important than the average person in this regard.
Well, as I said before, the agency. I'm focused now on the pharmaceutical area because that's the audience here. It is functioning. There is stability. I've talked to a number of reviewers. Their reviews go uninterrupted. Their
Hmm.
meetings with the industry continue. I think Dr. Makari is aware that there's been an upheaval. When you lose 20% of your staff, of course there's
Yeah.
going to be an upheaval. When some of the most senior people leave, of course there's going to be an upheaval. I would hope that there will be an increased attention to the stability, to consistent policies, to consistent decisions, to using outside experts, when appropriate. Advisory committees, I think, would be a good idea. But Dr. Makari now has a year of management under his belt, and I'm always optimistic that things will uh, be better in the future than they have been. I would say that under any circumstance. So
Sure.
again, but it basically comes down to my confidence in the people who work at the FDA, and they will make it right. They will
Hmm.
make they will make it right.
Fair enough and good answer. Wayne Pines, everybody, go subscribe to his YouTube channel right now. And if you're listening on the
Not a
podcast,
YouTube channel, it's just a
oh,
podcast.
just the podcast, we're gonna put it on
FDA,
there.
I'm going to say FDAWatch.net. Go subscribe.
FDAWatch.net. It is underneath this channel right now on YouTube. Click it, subscribe. Also, if you're listening, click it, subscribe. It's a must listen. I just subscribed the other day, so thank you, Wayne. I really appreciate you coming
And
on.
it's been an honor to spend this time with you. It really has.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody, go do it right now. Click. Bye bye.